Hi, everybody. Good morning. Great. We're on to our lecture today. Speakers, headphones. Let me get up a document here and our PowerPoint, and we'll kick into it. It's a Word document. We had it open there a second ago. Open. Yeah, I'm getting a bit better at this kind of thing now. We can reduce it a little so we can see it and we can bring it over here. Okay, and you can. Yeah, I'm going to. Okay, today we're going to talk about Spanish cinema. That'll be lectures one and lectures two. Cinema, very important in Spain. As your studies go on here, especially later third, fourth years, you'll see a lot more concentration on cinema. Why is it so important in Spain? We call it the seventh art. Perhaps because sadly in Spain there's a long history of Spain is one of the highest levels of the word we use is analfabetismo, which is illiteracy. And Spain has traditionally had, along with Greece, Sicily, the south of Italy, one of the highest levels of literacy in Europe. That means people don't can't read. So the paradox of that is that you'd see in Spain a great love towards books, a great tener cultura, to have culture is a beautiful phrase. It means to be a good person. El que no, este no tiene cultura means he's a boor. It's a real insult to not have culture. You'll see many Spanish houses will have a little library, but that doesn't mean that people actually read the books. And it's where cinema becomes very important because people traditionally have gone to the cinema and will watch films on the screen. So cinema has become, I suppose, it's a strong word, a didactic tool in Spanish society, which means a tool of education that people learn from. Okay, this is only just a beginner's guide to Spanish cinema, so you're not expected to, you know, people say I'm not into film studies. Of course not. That's fine, but just to understand the role that cinema has played in Spain and continues to play. Spain still has, I mean, it was obviously very, very badly hit by the pandemic and COVID, but still a very strong cinema going public. Small towns in Spain, you'd still see El Cine, Ir El Cine, during the summertime, open air cinemas. Don't have to, they're starting to come in Ireland, but excuse me, you'll see them in Spain. Right, just for a brief piece of history here at the start. Spanish cinema was there at the very same time as we began cinema in France at the birth of cinema. And the first ever feature is there. I've put it up May 15th, 1896 in the Hotel de Rusia in Madrid. And then we have it's just the same time as we have the Lumiere brothers in Paris. So they're right at the beginning. We see Fructuoso Jalabert, Reina de Café Brawl. So those type of black and white silent movies. 1906, Hispano Films in Barcelona is founded. We don't really want to spend too much time on this, but we just want to note 1915, then we have the start of the Benito Perojo comedies. Panaderia, Cochero a Punto, Panaderia Cabby, Taxi Driver at the Ready. These are comedies, and the character is Benito Perojo, similar to a Charlie Chaplin. I've deliberately put here politics because a lot of today we'll be talking about the relationship between politics and sociocultural issues and cinema in Spain. In 23, we have the beginning of the dictatorship of Primo Rivera, sometimes called a dicta blanda, as against a dictadura. And that's really, I suppose, a precursor for the Francoist dictatorship and Francoism. It lasts for 7 years. Dicta blanda, sometimes as against dictadura hard, dictatorship, dicta blanda. It wasn't as severe. I suppose the first huge film that comes in this time is so we have the Luis Bunuel, and we just need to recognise his name. Uh, Probably the most acclaimed, alongside Pedro Almodovar, of the Spanish film cinema directors. However, I would argue about Bunuel that Bunuel, we talk about it, his early career is in Spain, and he's a compatriot of Salvador Dali, Federico Garcia Lorca, the poet, in the famous Residencia de sus Estudiantes in Madrid, and they're a group of intellectuals. But Buñuel, quite soon in the early 30s, goes to Paris, and could be considered as much a French cinema director as a Spanish one. His name is Luis Buñuel. He makes films in Mexico, but he never actually returns to Spain, and never makes a film in Spain after these. However, we have, so that's why I've even put up that Un Perro Andaluz, Andalusian Dog, was made in French, and Chien Andalou. And that's one of the most celebrated films of all time. It's a surrealist film. It's famous for there's a band that it's one of these films. It's short. It's a surrealist film, which means it just, so. To be honest, it isn't part of the Spanish canon of the time. It's much more influenced by French surrealism, etc. And we see the famous. You can go and have a look at it in the clip. There's the slicing of eyeballs, and then you have the armpit turns into flies. So it's very much influenced by French culture of the time, surrealism, James Joyce, Tree of Conscious Thought, those type of ideas. The Pixies had the famous song afterwards. That we just pause for a second there. Sorry, I just changed them. So the Pixies had. Oh God, we'd have to go back to it here. Right word. Open. Spanish cinema downloads. Surely we should be seeing. We should be seeing. Open. No. Pages results. Don't worry, we were talking, so we'll go back 1 second again into downloads. We should be able to see Spanish cinema. That's where we were, wasn't it? Or Word. Probably best if we go into Word. Okay. Yeah, this is quite bizarre. Okay, come back to this in a second. I'm going to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this for a second, and rather than wasting too much more time for you, and I'll come back with the PowerPoint. We'll continue the lecture. I'm allowed pause recording here. Okay, here we go. We're back. Now, I was able to get there a second ago, so we'll just go back into this document, and there we go. Pick up where you left off. Brilliant. So that's, and Shannon DeLu was the Pixies, the baser. I'm not going to sing it for you, but he probably was kind of a big cult hit of the 80s, 90s. Got me a movie, I want you to know. Slicing of eyeballs, I want you to know. D-Bass. But saw them once live in Sydney, the Pixies. Good band. 1929, first talkies come in Spain. El Misterio de la Puerta del Sol, and the Mystery of the Puerta del Sol. But what's most interesting, what I really want you to come out of today's lecture with, things like this. The growth of La Españolada. Ooh, what is La Españolada? It'll be very, very influential later on Almodovar. And it's an exaggerated form of Spanishness. We see it in Ireland in the late 60s. Films like, this is good, you've seen this, St. Patrick's Day. Films like Darby O'Gill and Little People. Films about an exaggerated form of Irishness. The Flight of the Doves, Walter Mackin. Exaggerated forms of Irishness, even a bit into the West, Gabriel Byrne. So definitely we see that in Spain, La Españolada, people in Spanish costumes, very Spanish style. Rosario La Cortijera, one of the 35, 1936, Maria Lo, Morena Clara. So all I'm trying to point out with these is that these are different, that Spain is different than what we maybe see in other national cinemas. We also have farm comedies. Wow, films about on the farm. See them a bit in America. 1950s, Seven Brides with Seven Brothers, Little House on the Prairie. You know those type of but farm comedies about these would be important. We see in about half an hour's time. The idea of the pueblo, the village, as a redemptive force, as something good, something positive, and the city as a bad thing. That's very much a theme in Spanish cinema, still a theme in Spanish life. It's something that I suppose we're trying to do in this series of lectures. Pueblo, like people will say to you, Vas al Pueblo. When I went to live in Spain first, I grew up, I was born in Dublin, but grew up in Limerick. And I don't have a Pueblo. My parents was from Dublin, one from Limerick. Actually made up one. I made up one, a nice one, a dare, a darry, as a Pueblo, because that's the idea of Spain is shows it's a rural and cultural country, and people will say to you, it's quite common in Spain, El fin de semana vas al pueblo, and you're going to the village at the weekends. In summer, you all go back to El Pueblo para fiestas, which would be local. Here in Ireland, it's different. A lot of people here escape from a village and don't go back, and it's a complicated, but definitely in Spain that idea of ir al pueblo. Um, uh, and you'll see this in films of Almodovar, right through in Pain and Glory, the recent one, Antonio Banderas, back in Kika, Atame, Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down. The pueblo is that this redemptive force, this where it's something good in society. And you will hear that in Spain, Las Fiestas del Pueblo. Even then, when people go to the city in Spain, they tend to, which in Ireland, do people like someone out there from Kilmallock, do all the Kilmallock lads hang around together, or the fellas from Corofin, or the girls, and that La Gente del Pueblo. If you go to Madrid, there's areas, and they will be from the same pueblo. Es el bar de Pueblo de Galicia. Este mi pueblo, and then people go back in the summertime. Will often marry someone from El Pueblo. So there's it's that idea of pueblo is far more pueblo. It's not a village. It's far more that it's a very important cultural marker in Hispanic society. Moving on, so we see these farm comedies. We also see clerical cinema. These are films about priests and nuns. Very unique to Spain. Also to stranger to America in the 1950s. You'll see films like Going My Way, Spencer Tracy, Boys Town, about a priest who has a hostel for a load of boys. Again, this is all pre child abuse scandals. This is when very positivity towards the Catholic Church. I see this in Spain. Definitely, we see this also in literature, and we would see it in Ireland. And you'll see El Niño de las Monjas, Jose Buch, the child of the nuns. Marcelino Panibino, Marcelino Bread and Wine is a famous one. Francisco Camachos I've put down there, El Cura de Aldea, the village priest. Again, the idea of the countryside. So films about priests and nuns. I put up Bunuel definitely, and what I am pointing out is that that's a maverick film, and Shell Andalou, and then he makes his last film in Spain, 1933, which again is not part of the canon of Spanish cinema, but is a wonderful film. After he makes the film, he has to leave Spain. before the onset of civil war. And that's Las Hordas, Tierra sin pan, which is the Hordas, land without bread. Some of you will have gone or will go someday. Salamanca, beautiful city in Spain, 2 hours, 2.5 to the west of Madrid. Then about an hour underneath. Now it is difficult to get there because you can go by Ciudad Rodrigo. There's just mountains. La Sierra de Francia. You have a region, Las Hordas, one of the most backward regions in Europe, where people still live. And at the time, and he makes a documentary film on it. And the idea is that the people were so backward they couldn't even make bread, which is one of the most basic things in Mesopotamia 2,000, 3,000 years before people had started making bread. So it's a hard hitting social documentary. Very, very important film. But that was not really what people were making in Spain at the time. But you will hear about this film, Las Hordas Tierra Sin Pan. Still today, if you go to Las Hordas, fascinating area. I've gone there and it's still, in later years, then Franco had a policy of resettling a lot of handicapped people in the area, which led to people intermarrying and it's like you're in Madrid, a couple of hours away, the skyscrapers and the modern European city. In Las Hordas, um, still just cans and bars, no grifos, no taps. Uh, People were frightened when they saw me, see you forastero, an outsider. People wouldn't like to see cameras of pictures taken, and still animals living with them underneath in the houses. And geez, I brought a girl there. Holidays and has heard this. Um, very, very what you may expect to see in countries like people talk about Moldova or rural Bulgaria, those type of countries. And this is in the center of Spain. But I was in 33. So Spain and Hollywood, El Presidio, Le Llama Sagrada, Sacred Flame. So Spain, the first there are Spanish films being made in Hollywood, and that of course is the whole Mexican, the Hispanic link. And then a very important event happens that we keep talking about, and you'll be talking about from the beginning to the end of your Spanish studies here, the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, which was brother against brother, village against half, right versus left, them versus us. And Franco and the right wing church, the monarchy, the army, the forces of conservatism, the Catholic Church win that war against the left, the communists, the anarchists, the have nots. I think it's not a great phrase, but los pudientes won. Those who have, los no pudientes, the have nots lost. But it's during the Spanish Civil War, the cinema really takes up its leading role in Spanish society. Right from the start, both sides understood the importance of cinema in reaching, on a propaganda level, a largely, illiterate population. So we had the foundation of the Departamento Nacional de Cinematografía, National Department of Filmmaking, and that's on the Francoist side. On the Republican side, we have Los Aguilachos, that's the FAI. It has nothing to do with the Irish Football Association. It's the Federación Anarquista Ibérica. John Delaney did not fight in the Spanish Civil War. Los Aguilachos, por tierras de Aragon. So these Republican Aurora de Esperanza, Dawn of Hope. These are Republican propaganda films, really, really strong. Sierra Teruel, in French, L'Espoir, is made by André Malraux, who would later become the French Minister for Culture. Tierra de España is shot among the screenwriters of John Dos Passos, the famous American left-wing novelist, wrote USA Trilogy, and Ernest Hemingway, the famous Nobel Prize winner for literature. On the nationalist side, we have very strong propaganda films as well. Bilbao para España, Asturias para España, Sevilla Rescatada, Sevilla Rescued. 1938, you have the birth of Nodo, which is Noticiario Español, which is the Spanish newsreels, and that will bring what's happening in Spain. It's proper. As much as people talk about a TASS news agency in Russia at the moment, Nodo becomes that's where Spanish people, particularly in rural areas, will get their information from for a long, long time. Important to point out at the time, again, it's an introductory lecture, I don't want to worry too much. There was Spanish-German collaboration, as one would, as Franco, this Catholic reactionary, had an ally in Adolf Hitler. So, in 1938, we have Carmen, La de Triana, y El Barbero de Sevilla. These are actually made in Germany, so it's just pertinent to point out. The next film I want to speak about is, Civil War ends in 1939, Franco wins. There's a famine in Spain, La Hambruna. Spain is ostracized from the rest of the world. And often you want to know, at the moment, you want to know how do we understand Vladimir Putin? What's going on in his mind, or what's going on in Zelensky's mind? What's going on in Boris Johnson's? How do we understand a person's worldview? Donald Trump or different Barack Obama. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, which he wrote as a young man. And that's people obviously that's how you find out about Hitler, but that was before. It was written a long time before Hitler became the Hitler that we knew. But it obviously is a help. Well, if you want to know about Francisco Franco, watch the film Raza, or Espíritu de una Raza, Spirit of a Race, directed in 1941 by José Luis Sáenz de Heredia, starring Alfredo Mayo. Money was flushed into this film. It's a very strong film. José Luis Sáenz de Heredia was the best director of the time. Alfredo Mayo was probably the most popular, best actor in Spain at the time. But what is noteworthy about the film is the screenwriter was Francisco Franco. That's amazing. This is Franco. He made it's an allegorical about a family. It's his family, about a brother on the right, brother on the left who becomes a priest, and the other brother is redeemed at the end and discovers the right way, which is the Catholic conservatism. You want to know what made up Franco, what was going on in his mind. Watch Rafa. He took a couple of months off in 1940 to write the screenplay. I mean, this is incredible. In the middle of famine, just after winning a civil war, a dictator took time out to write a screenplay. It's obviously under a pseudonym, but it's imagine Micheál Martin taking a couple of months off to write a screenplay for a film, Martin's vision, which is the kind of our Ireland, and we know what's, or as we said, disturbingly Vladimir Putin. So Rafa is Franco's vision of Spain. In later years, there's parts written out of the film. The Falange, who were the Spanish fascist party, and they're written out of the film. There's minutes, there's just taken out and changed. The film was lost for years, actually, and then it was found, interestingly, in Berlin, which shows, again, the collaboration between Spain and Germany at the time. Edgar Neville does Make El Último Caballo, 1950. That's a neo-realist author film, and you would hear about that, but it doesn't fit into what's really going on in Spain at the time. And then we have, obviously, Spain, a lot of censorship throughout the 40s, 50s. We have a very repressive Catholic reactionary regime. A film that has come out at the time is Leni Riefenstahl makes Tiefland, 1954. Riefenstahl was Hitler's favourite director, female director. She died several years ago, but who had made Triumph of the Will, who had made Olympia. So I'm just pointing out that the only place in the world where she could work after Nazi Germany was in Francoist Spain. So the 1950s is when we're seeing neo-realist cinema in Italy, strong films about poverty and life, themes of suicide being dealt with, poverty. In France, the beginning of the French New Wave. What's in Spain, cinema is escapist, but it's what people are watching, children's cinema becomes very important, which is obviously a retreat into a very childlike world. I mentioned already Marcelino Panivino. It's about a little boy who goes to heaven. Lovely films. Joselito with the golden voice. He's El Ruiseñor, the Mockingbird. It's going to be his oh, with the beautiful voice, Joselito with his orange, Marisol, another blonde child actor, Pilly and Millie, later become Anna Boleyn. So we have this in Spain, a total retreat from major sociocultural issues and those. But we do have the beginning of new Spanish cinema. That's what's going to be important to us and these directors. In 51, we have Furros, Surcos, José Antonio Nieves Conde. Also, the same year comes out Esa Pareja Feliz, Juan Antonio Bardem and Luis Garcia Berlanga. And these are films about ordinary life, boring films, but Spain is a boring, stunted society at the time, dominated by censorship, dominated by the Catholic Church. In 1952, Bienvenido Mr. Marshall, Welcome Mr. Marshall, again by Berlanga. It's about a Spanish village that, because Spain was at the time, Spain was like Russia is becoming right now, or like Afghanistan at the moment. Spain was, we call them Los Años del Ostracismo, the years of ostracism. Spain was out of the UN, Spain was out of everything, Spain was gone. The Marshall Plan, which was American money, came into Europe, rebuilt Europe after World War II. Obviously, France, Italy, the rebirth of Germany, the EC comes out of this, Great Britain as well. As Spain is left out of this completely. The only actually link that Spain has in many ways is to say during the famine at the time, it was Argentina that sent Perón, another dictator who was later the husband of Eva Perón. He sent meat, and there's a famous speech in the 60s to the UN when Franco says everyone wants to be Spain's friend. Now is Spain industrialized and under the new technocrats in Spain re-entered Europe with cheap labor and tourism, of course. Because everyone wants to be our friends now. When we needed friends, in those harsh years of the late 40s, early 50s, Nazi Germany now was gone. Mostly Italy was gone. Our only friend was Argentina sent us meat, and our old ally Ireland. I think Sean Lemass at the time or whatever, they were mortified because Ireland again was a country on the edge, dominated by the Catholic Church. Archbishop McQuaid, watch films like The Rocky Road to Dublin to see about this, and Peter Lennon's. So Ireland, that's why Ireland and Spain has a very similar type of a stilted, culturally stunted, culturally suffocating atmosphere, years of darkness. And Mr. Marshall, the whole village dresses up for the American to come, the American delegation, who they think will bring investment, and at the end of the film, it's a very dark ending because the Americans come up in the car and the flag, and they just fly through the main street of the village. 55, Muerte de un Ciclista, that of a cyclist, Bardem again, one of these films about ordinary, boring life in Spain, similar to El Inquilino, Nieves Conde, in 57. What have I done here? What have I done? Navigation, I shouldn't have done that. Right. Okay, we're going to pause a second. We're not going to cancel my recording. We're going to pause, and we're going to get back to where we should be. We're back, and we're going to our downloads again. We're going to Word. We're seeing less of me all the time. Doesn't really matter. Brilliant. Okay, we get to where we are. Out of this came the Salamanca Conversations, 1957, which were what was going on in Spain from a sociocultural point of view, but especially about film. Remember at the time in Germany, with the Oberhausen Manifesto of new wave French cinema. The Salamanca Conversations came to the conclusion that Spanish cinema was A, politically ineffectual, B, socially false, C, intellectually lacking, D, aesthetically non-existent, and E, industrially weak. Okay, it wasn't all that bad. But as you can see, even the whole Las Conversaciones, because we're in this suffocating years of oppression, of darkness, but out of this come this tacit acknowledgement by Spanish filmmakers that Spain needed to move out of these years of cultural phrase used, el atraso, backwardness, and film leads this. In '59, we have two films come out. Carlos Saura, just notice the name. He's the director that Los Golfos y Los Olvidados, the scoundrels, the Golfos, the Los Olvidados, the forgotten ones, about life. First time on the edges of Madrid, and these people trying to be bullfighters, poverty, people living in shanty towns, chabolas, we call them, on the outskirts of the big cities. For the first time in Spain, we're starting to see this on the screen. There's a meeting in '61 of Saura and Bunuel meet at the Cannes Film Festival, and I suppose it's like old Spain. This Bunuel was living now in Paris, and he's totally immersed in that Parisian French New Wave type of atmosphere, and he meets Saura. At '61, Brilliana, which is Bunuel's one of his masterpieces, wins the Palme d'Or in Cannes. It's criticised by L'Osservatore Romano, which is Italian Catholic conservative newspaper. Film wasn't shown in Spain, but we have Escuela Oficial, the Cine is opened, and we have this Nuevo Cine Español, the idea of possibilism and apertura. Apertura is the word openness. We're going to open up in Spain. That's what we spoke last week. Do you remember El Destape? Before El Destape, the lifting off the lid, we had apertura. So we see films like Bardem's Calle Mayor, 1956, Main Street, Nunca Pasa Nada, Nothing Ever Happens, very of the time, 1963. I'm putting these up. It's difficult for you to imagine when you go to Spain, you find this place of, as we said last week, we're going backwards in this lecture series, the nightlife, the Madrid of Tierno Galban, Malasaña. Jeremy spoke about La Movida and the craziness. But before that, we had night watchmen, serenos. We had a very, very conservative, almost medieval lifestyle from the aspects of culture in Spain. Berlanga's La Botique, it was to avoid censorship, was shot in Argentina. But we have some films coming out. Manuel Summers, Del Rosa La Murillo, '63. First time kind of ideas of something different. Saura's La Caza, The Hunt, '65. And we see the first criticism of the regime in that. And that wins the Golden Bear in the Berlin Film Festival. For the first time, I've seen these very important films. They're so important because nothing else is being criticized. For the first time, people are seeing these and beginning to look at their own society and criticize it. We're still not mentioning the Civil War. God, we're not going to be able to mention that for a while. Franco's still alive. Franco is still has a huge reign on power and grip on power. I'm sorry. Juan Carlismo hasn't come yet, but Franco was the leader from obviously 36, 39, won the Civil War, till 75. The Opus Dei, who were religious technocrats, have taken control of the economy in the 60s. And the economy begins to open up, particularly car factories. And we have Fassa Renault. Renault moves to Valladolid, Palencia, with huge car factories, cheap labour, no unions. Ford go to Valencia, Citroën go to Vigo. Later on, we'll have Suzuki down in Jaén. And all the cars for Europe are manufactured in Spain. Heavy industry. And for people, America comes in for bases, Morón La Frontera, Torrejón. And Spain enters the UN with only with support of America, because America wanted Spanish bases, and Spain as a Catholic ally against communist Russia in the Cold War. The Barcelona School, 62 to 75, and Almodovar comes out of this. Fata Morgana by Vicente Aranda, 65. And these were kind of offbeat left-wing films, a bit left of centre. Left-wing wouldn't be, but Dante Nos Únicamente Severo, 67, by Jacinto Esteva and Joaquin Horta. Noches de Vino Tinto, Nights of Red Wine, José María Núñez. These were known as the 60mm directors because they would make these films on handheld cameras. As you have on October 1st to 6th, 67, the Callipolis Hotel. International Film Symposium, the first international. So we have these from outside ideas coming in. And in 67, you have the end of apertura, the end of openness. Look at things we're going to open up, a bit like, so sadly, there's going to be a ceasefire and there isn't. Manuel Fraga, um, who would be around for many, many years. He becomes the Minister of Culture. Uh, and we know Franco has Parkinson's. He's sick. We know he's going to die. But towards the end of the Franco's regime, in fact, it was very, very severe in Spain. It went back from these years of openness, almost a reaction towards the end. Um, but Kurosawa does make, there's three critical film, and they're critical of Spanish society. Managed to get past the censor, but they're critical. That's Peppermint Frappe with his wife of the time, who was Charlie Chaplin's daughter, Geraldine Chaplin. That's 67. Then in 1968 we have Stress es Tres Tres, Stress is 3 3, and La Madriguera, The Den, in 1969. But as I said, we're going backwards culturally. Now we have a new hardline Carrero Blanco government in 69, which is he's a military man. Franco's still the leader. Franco's spending a lot of time in hospital. He's sick. Carrero Blanco is um, if you could be to the right of Franco, military man, admiral. In 1970, Fraga does show in the personal wishes of Fraga was Minister for Culture at the time. Does show Tristana, which is a very very that's a Bunuel film, again anti church, anti clerical, which is a huge theme of Bunuel's work. It's made, but that was shown that should be mentioned. December 1970, we have the Burgos trials, where we have members of ETA, who were the Basque separatist group, are executed. They're one of the last kind of mass executions in Europe. Is like in the 70s. This is around the time of Woodstock in America, hippies, Power 68, and we have a military regime in Spain, executing people, and that was quite strong, reported and seen throughout Europe. But people knew something was going to happen. There would be a change. Um, Very interesting is the last, which is 72, 73 there, um, Last Tango in Perpignan, because the film came out of Bernardo Bertolucci. Last Tango in Paris. It's a very, very kind of French film at the time. Romy Schneider, very, very overtly, very strong scenes, particularly the scenes that he's got with soap, and there's scenes of anal sex, and it's a man, Marlon Brando. For people, it's over the top. It was a very very strong film, with scenes of sodomy, etc. Obviously, was not shown in Spain. It was banned in Spain. It was banned in Ireland too. But a load of cinemas would show that this is even the early 70s. And what people would do at the weekend is in Spain, there would be bus tours that would go over the border into France, to see these movies, to see a bottom, to see nudity, to see a rude, to see a dirty movie, whatever you want to call it, to see a modern movie. And still today, if you drive up just after the border of Barcelona, that's why there's a huge paradox, because it's now Spain is the country where prostitution, drugs, are easily accessible when you cross the border. From where France is now much more conservative on the other side, but it wasn't always that way. Quite recently, it was total opposite. And just when you pass by the border there at La Jonquera, and you go into France, you'll see, and you drive up towards Narbonne, you'll see on these abandoned cinemas, loads on both sides of the road. Because obviously, once Franco died, and we had what we spoke about last week, El Destape lifting off the lid, there was no need for those cinemas anymore. A film does come out in 73. I've mentioned it here. El Espíritu de la Colmena, The Spirit of the Beehive, starring Ana Torrent with Victor Arife. Very strong. This is the first film now that we're criticising the Franco's regime, we're criticising the repression. We used colour a lot rather than, and this film uses a lot of hues of beige and grey. The idea of a third way rather than, and really strong film, the power of the look. It's about a little girl, about people in a rural area in Spain, and it's after during the Civil War that it's a Republican prisoner is on the run, and they help him, and it's a it's a beautiful film. But I just want you, don't be worried, you don't have to watch, you don't have to. Hopefully, you will see it someday. But I wanted to mention it. In 1973, we have Carrero Blanco assassinated by ETA, the, the Basque separatist terrorist group, um, and that's a very so he's killed, and we just know that it's like the last days of the Francoist regime. Sours and Kelly comes out in February 1975, just trying like Sweden, Bergman, it's been outdone in film. Italy, like we have Salo, Pier Paolo Pasolini, mass orgies and sodomy, drugs, the same in the US. Zabriskie Point, Antonioni's, where all this huge mass orgy in Nevada desert. Everyone's paid in drugs. At the end of the film, everything's blown up. And in Spain, in February 1975, we have a new film law. I'm going to read out what it had. Nudity will be admitted if it is required by the total unity of the scenes, and will be rejected when it is presented with the intention of awakening passions in the normal spectator or when it is considered pornography. Wow, Jesus Christ. And so I think that statement itself just shows how repressive Spain was from a sociocultural point of view. And actually, people cheered in the cinema. Everyone knew Franco was in his last. November 20th, he finally dies. Uh, and out comes a couple of huge films at the time that were actually shot as he was dying. Fortibos, Poachers, Jose Luis Borao, very critical regime, comes out just after. And Cria Cuervos, Raised Ravens, really, really by our old friend. You see his name coming up again and again, Carlos Saura. Um, and a little girl gets out of the bath and we see her bottom, and that's it. That's the first. And now in Spain, it's actually quite difficult to see a film without it went because I think that's what we're trying to do in these lectures, show you how Spain changed. This 75, una ruptura, a break, a radical break. To be before Spain was this medieval, quaint, and suddenly it became the drugs and pornography capital of Europe. But some of the problems in Spain is that obviously not everyone went on this trip, and there's still those in the army and Catholic. There are the paradoxes that you will see in Spain. Um, um, but there is this huge before and after, and that's something that post Franco Spain, Franco Spain. It's not Franco in itself. It's what he stood for and what he represented. Brilliant. I don't want to go too much into talking because next week we'll continue talking about. I will move to Almodovar and talk about him and Juan Jose Bigas Luna. But we all kind of nearly want to leave it there at with Franco as such and his death. And then we've actually there's a great film that came out, Torremolinos 75, which is a comedy. It's a film. It's about this period and how a guy in Spain became a porn star overnight. From being in the and Spain decided to make that change and go with that change. And film was very, very important in this. I said that's probably why I don't want to jump ahead because we'll just see what we're going to see. There's no big secret right here. Let's go to what we're talking about next week is transition to democracy, El Destape, that we spoke about, which is very much linked with this. A new chronicle of the Civil War. We can finally talk about the Spanish Civil War, a new genre, because we haven't mentioned it, we haven't, and the war is culturally referred to as Un Millón de Muertos, a million dead. We hadn't made any films about it. Hold on. I think when you look at these lectures, there's a lot of similarities in Ireland. We didn't make films about the Irish Civil War for a long time. And then Michael Collins came out a few years ago, and there are films made about, but we didn't, we still, kind of, oof, grey area takes a long time. In the Second World War, felt the same. People didn't, about the questions of collaboration. It took in Italy till 1970 when we see The Conformist, Spider Stratagem. France, there's French students out there today, long, long time in France before we see La Comme Lucienne and Louis Malle, Au revoir les enfants, Goodbye children, again Louis Malle. We beautiful, strong films. Les Choristes comes afterwards about collaboration with Nazi Germany. We don't, it's a long time before we can make these films. And in Spain, then we had a whole raft of films come out about the Civil War. Jaime Camino, Las Largas Vacaciones del 26, the long holidays of 36, Bardem's El Puente, Berlanga's La Escopeta Nacional. These all come out. Gutierrez Aragon's Camada Negra, really strong film. The end, the guy stamping about fascism, Black Brood, Sonambulos, in 78. The Barrios, El Desencanto. So we have these films, we're ready to go. We're waiting for Franco to die. José Luis Garcís, Asignatura Pendiente. Pilar Miró, who was the Minister for Culture, who tragically died very young afterwards. El Crimen de Cuenca, the Cuenca Crime, very, very strong film. So we're the Civil War has now been dealt with, not in literature, not in newspapers, but on the screen. And a very important role is playing in attempting to reunify Spanish culture, Spanish society. Jaime Darmiñán is nominated for an Oscar in 1980 for El Nido. And we've documentaries about the war come out as well. Go back up there, sorry. Cinema Verité. Basilio Martin Patino makes Canciones para Después de la Guerra. It had been made in 71, but it was only released in 76. He makes a beautiful film, actually, Martin Patino, which is Nueve Cartas a Berta. That's 65. 9 Letters to Berta. It's about an exchange student. We're going back now a little. Who's a British exchange student, a girl who comes to Spain at the time to learn Spanish. She meets a Spanish guy, not sexual, not, and then she goes back into exchange, and she's telling him all about England and the Beatles, and and he's telling about his life in Spain. And it highlights the suffocating sociocultural atmosphere under Franco in the Spanish 60s, in comparison with what was happening in the UK. And then we had massive change that even today, people often ask me, Spanish secondary school teachers or something, can you recommend me a film to show students? A lot of you would have been in secondary schools. Some of you are responsible for this. Nearly every film now in Spanish film is, I was watching it in Almodovar the night, actually for once it was restrained. Lovely film, Pain and Glory. But there was then at the end a full frontal nudity with a guy who was, there's no need for it, and right through Spanish, But I remember once it was a really lovely film, Secretos del Corazón, Secrets of the Heart, about family relationships up in Navarra, and I recommended it to a secondary school teacher. And then, just in the middle of the film, then we've 2 dogs copulating, like no need for it, But in Spain, very much changed from being a desexualized or oppressed society to being a over-sexualized, and if obviously people like this, well, the kids are under 18. It's just absolutely nothing you can show. There's nothing that it suddenly became the world capital of sex, drugs, fun, and violence. Testimonial cinema. Gonzalo Herralde's Raza, El Espíritu Franco. So we have films which and we'll deal with this. I'm going to go back to it too much. Yeah, we'll go back and we'll kind of finish up in that. How would one say, a review or a look back at Franco's Spain. And then we have the porn films that come out, soft porn. And this is the beginning of the Almodovar. Bardem, El Poder del Deseo. This is the same Bardem who made Nunca Pasa Nada, Calle Mayor. So collaborating those, The Power of Desire. Vicente Escribá makes Sorrita Martinez, Foxy Martinez. La Sorrita Bikini, Foxy in Bikini. Ignacio Aquino, the same. Quite like some of you might remember, don't show them anymore on telly because it's politically incorrect. But the Carry On films, you remember that? Carry On up the Khyber, Carry On washing windows and those type of things. So very much we see this, and these films will have, the usual people in bikini. You see Foxy in bikini, Foxy, Sorita as again that's the translation type of loose girl, those type of anyway, we'll reconvene and we'll talk about this more next week. So and be thinking for week 12. Remember we said kind of 1,000-word opinion piece or something you might like to be doing. Listen, we're thinking of going back in next week, but we see there's a record number of COVID figures and people back in hospital, and there's a good few people from the class are sick at the moment. Get well soon is the most important thing to them, and mind yourselves. And we're a big number, So we'll go with this for the moment. We'll go next week online, and it'll be Spanish Cinema 2, a bit more racy, a lot more racy. And we're talking about Alvaro and Bigas Luna, and I'll be recommending, maybe showing some clips for you to watch. Okay, so mind yourselves. We'll talk to you soon. All the best. Now, take care. Adios. Let me try and save this properly for myself. Stop recording, isn't that what I do? I don't cancel it. I stop it, and then I save it, and I upload it for you. If you haven't subscribed to that channel, please, that I'm putting the YouTube channel, that Charlie Murphy one, because if I'm putting on clips and that, I'll need you to be a subscriber to watch them for copyright purposes and all that kind of stuff. Okay, thanks a million.